You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I have to start with the weird 3-team trade that happened in baseball yesterday. Andrew Benintendi went from the Red Sox to the Royals. Franchy Cordero went from the Royals to the Red Sox. Josh Winkowski went from the Mets to the Red Sox. The Mets got him from the Blue Jays in the Steven Matz trade. Khalil Lee is going from the Royals to the Mets. And to round it all out, the Red Sox are getting 3 proverbial players to be named later. 2 from the Royals and 1 from the Mets. I'll start with the Royals because they're getting the best player in this deal. I don't get it. It makes no sense to me for the Royals to trade for Benintendi. It's not that the Royals didn't need Benintendi. And I like Benintendi. I don't think Benintendi's a bad player. I think last year was an aberration. Alright, I've seen Benintendi a lot. Very talented player. Had a bad year because of the 60-game joke. But look at what he did from 2016 to 2019. Very talented player. I'm not knocking Benintendi, but he doesn't make the Royals that much better. Like, maybe instead of finishing 4th in the AL Central, they're now gonna finish in 3rd. What difference does that make? This doesn't make the Royals better than the White Sox. This doesn't make them better than the Twins. Did they need another outfielder? Yes. They needed 2. Because outside of Whit Merrifield, they don't have any good outfielders. I understand wanting to get better. And I guess the Royals should be commended for that. But the Royals gave up a really good prospect in this deal in Khalil Lee. Worst case scenario for him is he turns into a backup outfielder. Best case scenario, you've got an everyday starter on your hands. It's not like the Royals gave up a bunch of schmageggies in this deal. If it was just Cordero and the players to be named later, fine. But the Royals are in a position now where they should be adding guys like Lee. Not trading them away. Andrew Benintendi is going to be a free agent at the end of the 2022 season. Would it really surprise you if Benintendi was traded by the Royals before those 2 years were up? I mean, what path do the Royals have to contending in 2 years? Their lineup isn't that good. Who scares you in that lineup? Salvador Perez? Adalberto Mondesi? Merrifield? Benintendi? You've got more than half the lineup to go. Those 4 guys aren't going to get the job done by themselves. Their starting pitching isn't that good. They don't have a bad bullpen, which is kind of weird. Guys like Scott Barlow, Josh Stallmont, Tyler Zuber, Kyle Zimmer, and Jake Newberry are solid relievers. But that doesn't mean anything if you can't get a lead to them. You take a look at their rotation. Brady Singer, Danny Duffy, Brad Keller, Chris Bubich, and blank. Danny Duffy's not that great. I like Singer, I like Keller, I like Bubich, but if you only have 3 good starters, you're not going to make much noise. The most optimistic projection I could give the Royals. Let's say all those guys I just mentioned have good seasons again, and let's say that Carlos Santana and Hanser Alberto revert back to 2019 form. If all that goes right for the Royals, and that's a big if, they're not going to finish with more than 75 wins. I understand the AL Central is a weak division. The Indians are going to be really bad, and the Tigers stink. But if the Royals were really going to make a go at this thing, seize upon a weak AL Central, you've got to do more than just signing Carlos Santana and Hanser Alberto and trading for Andrew Benintendi. This trade really doesn't move the needle for the Royals in a meaningful way. As for who the Red Sox got in this deal, it's kind of hard to fully evaluate it. There are 3 players to be named later in this deal. Obviously, we have no idea who those guys are going to be. Franchi Cordero's a nobody. He's a schlub. You don't need to know anything about him. Josh Winkowski, though, he has talent. I've spoken about him before. Ideal pitcher's frame, 6'4", 202 pounds. Good sinking fastball, really good slider that he can strike hitters out with. He's working on a changeup that he could develop into a solid pitch. Best case scenario for Winkowski, he's a 4th or 5th starter. Worst case scenario, he's a middle reliever. I do think he's going to make it in this league. But it's kind of funny, the best prospect to be traded in this deal didn't go to the Red Sox. The team that gave up the proven major leaguer. It went to the Mets. Khalil Lee has blazing speed. And when I say blazing, I mean he can run on a track team. In 2019, he played 129 games for the Royals AA team, the Northwest Arkansas Naturals. He had 53 stolen bases. He hit .264. He had .363 on base percentage. This guy can turn into the ideal leadoff hitter. Obviously, he has fantastic range. He can play all three outfield positions. He has the range for center field, but he also has a cannon for an arm. So you can put him in left, or you can put him in right. And he's played all three outfield positions in the minors. Over 200 games in center, over 140 games in right, and over 20 games in left. Let me tell you, the ceiling for this kid is Vince Coleman. The floor is probably Malik Smith. The Mets really won this trade. They did great to insert themselves in this deal. Any team could have been this third team to get Khalil Lee if the Red Sox really didn't want him. You gotta wonder why the Red Sox didn't want him. The Mets were wise to pounce on him. As for the secondary winner here, I'll give it to the Red Sox. I'm going to assume that at least one of the players to be named later is going to turn into a solid prospect. Is it possible that's not the case? Sure, but I highly doubt it. That leaves the Royals as the, I was going to say tertiary winner, but they're not a winner here. They're a loser. I don't get this trade for him. It doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't move the needle for them. They're now going from 4th place in the AL Central to 3rd. Congratulations. What do you want? A monument outside of Kauffman Stadium for not finishing in last place? I mean, come on. This trade made absolutely no sense for the Royals. Moving on now to the Dodgers avoiding arbitration with Walker Buehler. He signed a 2-year deal worth $8 million. This was going to be his first time going through arbitration. And this is an absolute steal for the Dodgers. I understand that this contract doesn't shake out exactly like this. But he's getting, in essence, $4 million a year. Let's take a look at what a guy like Jacob deGrom got when he was going through arbitration. $4,050,000 his first year. That was in 2017. And the year after, $7.4 million. The reason I brought up deGrom is because those 2 years were agreed to before he became one of the best pitchers in baseball. He was a really good pitcher, but he wasn't great. It was before he won his first Cy Young Award. I mean, there's really not much of a difference between the deGrom of then and the Buehler of now. Also, Buehler had something that deGrom didn't, and still doesn't. A World Series ring. So deGrom, in his first 2 years of arbitration, got just under $11.5 million. That's $5.75 million a year. And Buehler got almost $2 million less than that per year. Total, he got about $3.5 million less. I know I just threw a lot of numbers at you. If you need to rewind this, I promise you, it all tracks. The fact that Walker Buehler agreed to this is unbelievable. Just go year to year. Go through the arbitration process. The Dodgers just got cost certainty on one of the best young pitchers in baseball. The second starter for a team that just won a World Series. An integral part of this World Series favorite Dodgers team. This guy is getting basically $4 million a year for that. If you're another player like him, if you're another agent, you've got to be going nuts. I don't know who represents Buehler, but I promise you, every other agent in baseball is furious at him or her right now. What, is he that concerned he's going to get hurt? Buehler really doesn't have a lengthy injury history. He's not like Kershaw. Of course there's a risk of him getting hurt. That doesn't mean you take exponentially below market value. Here's the only thing I can think of. Trevor Bauer just signed an enormous contract with the Dodgers. It's a contract that gives him $40 million a year for the next 2 seasons. After that, the contract falls off. It's $17 million for the 3rd year. Bauer's probably gonna opt out of that. So the Dodgers are gonna gain some financial flexibility. It's possible they said to Buehler, hey, take this contract for the next 2 years and we'll pay you handsomely afterwards. It's possible there could be that kind of a handshake agreement in place, but it's not worth the risk. If you're Buehler, go through the arbitration process. You'd have made a lot more money. You still would have been a Dodger. You still would have had a great chance of winning World Series. There's no other way to say it. This is an absolute steal for the Dodgers. Moving on now to the Cubs, signing Jake Marisnick to a 1-year deal worth $1.5 million. And this makes sense. Marisnick was a solid backup outfielder for the Mets. Last year he had .333 with 2 home runs and 5 RBIs. The thing is, he only played in 16 games. In 2019 with the Astros, he hit .233 with 10 homers and 34 RBIs. But he's an excellent fielder with solid speed. It's perfectly fine to have a guy like that as a backup outfielder. The Cubs also have Phil Ervin, who I understand last year was terrible, hit just .149, but in 2019 he had .271. With 7 homers and 23 RBIs. Ervin and Marisnick actually complement each other pretty well. And that's not even counting a guy like Jock Peterson. God only knows how he fits into the Cubs outfield. The Cubs actually have a pretty cluttered outfield. Marisnick, Ervin, Peterson, Ian Happ, Nico Horner, and Jason Hayward. That's really good depth. I like that. In this coronavirus climate, you can't have too much depth. But bringing in Marisnick makes a lot of sense. Moving on now to the Blue Jays signing David Phelps to a 1-year deal worth $1.75 million. And this is a good move for the Blue Jays. Phelps struggled last year. He was good with the Brewers. Then he was traded to the Phillies because they really needed bullpen help. I'm pretty sure I praised that trade at the time. But Phelps laid an egg with the Phillies. He went 0-1 with a 12.91 ERA. With the Brewers, he went 2-3 with a 2.77 ERA. You put the two together, 2-4, 6.53 ERA. In 2019, though, he did pitch for the Blue Jays in 17 games, had a 3.63 ERA. Then he went to the Cubs, went 2-1 with a 3.18 ERA. That equates to a 3.41 ERA. Phelps failed as a starter with the Yankees. It's nice to see that he's turned his career around as a reliever. The Blue Jays just made a really good bullpen that much better. They have Kirby Yates, a prime bounce-back candidate. They have Jordan Romano, Rafael Dolis, Thomas Hatch, Ryan Borucki, and now David Phelps. That's a good bullpen. I do think the Blue Jays are going to make a lot of noise this year. They're the team I'm worried about the most in the AL East for my beloved Yankees. In fact, I'll even go a step further. The Blue Jays will be a wildcard team. Alright, now I'll give you some NFL Vault talk. And I'll start with some news that broke just as I was about to post yesterday's show. And that is the Broncos cutting A.J. Boye. Don't you remember when A.J. Boye was really good? Don't kid yourself, from 2016 to 2018, Boye was one of the best corners in all of football. Then he just fell off a cliff. I don't know what it was. In 7 games for the Broncos last year, he had a 55.6 overall grade, according to Pro Football Focus. Cutting him saved the Broncos $11.7 million. This was a no-brainer for George Payton. I'll say this about Boye, though. I do think he can land on his feet. He's only 29. And I'd be curious about him moving to safety. Because Boye has always been a good run defender and a good tackler. I wonder if he'd be amenable to that, and I wonder if a team would go along with it. I actually think it could be a very successful experiment. So yesterday, I talked about Marcus Mariota and how teams are interested in trading for him. If you didn't hear yesterday's show, I think the idea of him being the unquestioned starter is ludicrous. I have no problem with him being competition for a young quarterback, but the unquestioned starter, that's not going to work. to give him that title based off one good game really doesn't work for me. In that same vein, though, not exactly the same, because this guy played in 2 games last year, is Taylor Heinicke. Someone who I actually said the Jets could go after, because they do need a backup quarterback. Well, the Jets won't get a chance to sign him because Washington just signed him to a 2-year extension worth $8.75 million. And make no mistake about it, there is a real chance that Taylor Heinicke could be Washington's starting quarterback on opening day. Even though Alex Smith is a great story, just won Comeback Player of the Year, he's 37 years old. If Washington was to cut him now, they would save $14.7 million. If they designate him as a post-June 1st cut, they would save $19 million. Are they in cap hell? The answer is no. But we all know that Dan Snyder likes to be aggressive in free agency. So it does beg the question, should Taylor Heinicke start on week 1 for the Washington football team? I'll say this. He deserves the opportunity. Heinicke relieved Dwayne Haskins in Week 16 against the Panthers and played well. Completed over 63% of his passes for 137 yards and a touchdown. A couple weeks later, he started against the Buccaneers in the wildcard round. He wasn't bad. Completed just under 60% of his passes, was responsible for 2 touchdowns, threw for over 300 yards. It was an incredibly impressive performance. And Washington's in a position where they can't draft one of the top quarterbacks. They're not going to get Lawrence, they're not going to get Fields, they're not going to get Wilson. But it's at least conceivable that they could get Lance, Trask, or Jones. If you're Washington, you could do worse than drafting a guy like that and let him compete with Heinicke and Kyle Allen. I don't mind that. This move makes perfect sense for Washington. I think if Taylor Heinicke was to start multiple games next year, he'd do a solid job. He wouldn't be great. He wouldn't be Joe Theismann or anything, but he'd hold his own. To give him just over $4 million a year, that's fine. I have no problem with that whatsoever. Alright, now I'll give you some college basketball Valk talk. And I'll start with yesterday's game that featured 2 ranked teams. Rutgers versus Iowa. Let me tell you, the fact that Iowa was able to win this game is really impressive. It bodes really well for their chances to make a deep run next month. And I'm not saying that just because they beat a good Rutgers team. They should have beaten Rutgers. It was in Iowa. The Hawkeyes should have won. But who's Iowa's best player? Luka Garza. Usually, in college basketball, if your best player no-shows for a substantial portion of the game, you're going to lose. And Garza did. He didn't score until there were about 8 minutes left in the first half. He shot 2 of 10 from the field in the first half. He only had 8 points. He really didn't look good, but Joe Wieskamp, one of the most underrated players in the nation, I really like this kid, stepped up. He had a double-double yesterday, 26 points and 10 rebounds. Garza rounded into form in the second half. Give him credit for shaking off the slow start. He had a double-double, 22 points and 10 rebounds. Give Jordan Bohannon credit for distributing the ball efficiently. This was a really, really good win for the Hawkeyes. It should give their fans a lot of confidence. And also, their perimeter defense was really impressive. I understand that the Scarlet Knights aren't a good three-point shooting team. Outside of Jacob Young and Paul Mulcahy, no Scarlet Knight scares me from beyond the arc. But still, I thought Iowa did a really good job of contesting threes. And it showed yesterday. Rutgers only shot 6 for 28 from beyond the arc. That's just 21%. The only player to hit multiple threes for Rutgers was Young. Mulcahy only took 2 threes, which was really surprising. Geo Baker, 1 for 6 from beyond the arc. Caleb McConnell, 1 for 7 from beyond the arc. And Ron Harper went 0 for 4 from beyond the arc. In fact, the high men for Rutgers were Baker and Young. Baker had 11 points. Young had 10. You're not going to win too many games like that. This was a really impressive win for Iowa. They are a sleeper team for the big dance. Moving on now to the biggest upset yesterday. Ole Miss absolutely destroying Missouri. Look, this game was close throughout the first half. The Tigers only trailed by 5 after 20 minutes. But Ole Miss did a great job of pulling away in the second half, not letting Missouri catch their breath. They just put their throat on the Tigers and didn't let up. They executed perfectly. They shot 57% from the field. They more than doubled up the Tigers in terms of rebounds. Ole Miss had 31 rebounds. Missouri only had 15. It's kind of interesting. Ole Miss this year is a very defense-oriented team. They've given up just 63.2 points per game. That's the 31st best mark in the nation. Yesterday, they dropped 80 points against a decent Missouri defense. Not a great Missouri defense, just a decent one. Missouri's more of a well-rounded team. Ole Miss is very defense-oriented. But it wasn't the defense that won this game for Ole Miss. It was the offense. 3 Ole Miss players had at least 15 points. Devontae Shuler and Luis Rodriguez both had 15. Jarkel Joyner was the high man with 21 points. Don't look now, but Ole Miss is making a little bit of a run towards being a bubble team. They've won their last 3 games. They're 11-8 overall, 6-6 in the SEC. The SEC isn't great this year. It has a couple really, really good teams, Alabama and Tennessee. I don't think I'd put Arkansas in that class. Some people would. I just don't think I would. They just don't pass the eye test to me. It's possible Ole Miss could go on a crazy run. They could clinch their spot as being a bubble team. I do want to talk about a death that happened in the sports world yesterday, and that is Billy Conigliaro. Not Tony Conigliaro. Tony Conigliaro has been dead for a long time. Billy Conigliaro died yesterday at the age of 73. Yes, he was Tony's brother. Really sad story. Tony Conigliaro looked like he was going to be a great player for the Red Sox. Then Jack Hamilton hits him with a pitch that ends up fracturing his cheekbone, dislocating his jaw. He had a lot of eye damage afterwards, did Tony Conigliaro. Was never the same. Billy Conigliaro wasn't as talented as his older brother, but he wasn't a bad player. He was drafted 5th overall by the Red Sox out of Swampscott High School in Swampscott, Massachusetts. The Conigliaros grew up in Revere, Massachusetts. Billy Conigliaro is actually the answer to an interesting trivia question. Who's the first draft pick in Boston Red Sox history? Stump your friends with that one. In 1969, Billy Conigliaro made his major league debut. That was when Tony Conigliaro had come back from that devastating injury. So the two Conigliaros played together. It's kind of nice when that happens. Billy Conigliaro didn't play much that year, but he was productive. He had 288 with 4 homers and 7 RBIs. The year after that, the Red Sox had a little bit of a problem. They wanted Billy Conigliaro to get a lot of playing time, but their outfield was full from left to right. They had Carl Yastrzemski, Reggie Smith, and Tony Conigliaro. So the Red Sox moved Yastrzemski to first base to open up a spot in left for Billy Conigliaro. And I just like saying the last name Conigliaro. It's a fun last name to say. Billy Conigliaro that year had his best season. He had 271 with 18 homers and 58 RBIs. The year after that, he hit 262 with 11 homers and 33 RBIs. After that season, he was traded to the Brewers in a massive 10-player trade. Any old Red Sox or Brewers fan would remember this trade. It was Billy Conigliaro, Ken Brett, Joe LaHoo, Jim Lonborg, Don Pavletic, and George Scott going to the Brewers for Pat Scrabel, Tommy Harper, Lou Krause, and Marty Patton. That was a very big trade at the time. Billy Conigliaro didn't like playing for the Brewers. He was really unhappy there. He ended up retiring in the middle of the 72 season. Then he decided that he wanted to play baseball again. The Brewers sold him to the Athletics, which resulted in him making the playoffs for the only time in his career. He got the start in Game 3 of the ALCS that year against the Orioles. Angel Mangual had gotten hurt. Unfortunately for Conigliaro, he went 0 for 4. The Athletics did win that game 2-1, which helped them win the pennant and face the Mets in the World Series. That World Series went 7 games. The Athletics obviously won it. Yogi Berra started Tom Seaver in Game 6 as opposed to saving him for Game 7. The Mets lost Game 6. John Matlack got the start in Game 7. He imploded. The reason I'm bringing that up is because I wanted to establish that World Series went 7 games. The Athletics obviously won it, so that means that they lost 3 times. Here's an interesting trivia question for you. Conigliaro appeared in only 3 games in the 73 World Series. In games 2, 4, and 5, he was a pinch hitter. Those were the 3 losses that the Athletics had in the 73 World Series. For whatever it's worth, in every single one of those at-bats, Conigliaro made out. But make no mistake about it, for a few years, he was a good Red Sox. There was a point in time where it seemed like he was going to carry on his brother's legacy in Boston. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be, but we can take some solace in the fact that they are together again. May Billy Conigliaro, and Tony Conigliaro for that matter, rest in peace. Until tomorrow, I am Jacob Valk saying, shout out to you, Larry Flint.